Lead the charge.
All right, we're here again. Another episode of Zeno's podcast, Lead the Charge. Today's a pretty exciting one. I think it's a little bit of a different approach to what we've had previously, and it's because we're making a little bit of an announcement. So as an organization that's focused on making the future brighter and making the world a better place for the generations to come, we're really always heavily focused on giving back to the community or being involved in the community. So today we have Kelly Oehlerking, who's the executive director of KidSport Alberta, who's going to be talking about this new venture that Zeno has entered in, that we're focusing specifically around supporting KidSport and how we're going to be doing that. So thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me. I'm excited.
Yeah,
and super thankful you guys are partnering up with us. So always looking forward to talking about it and just kind of sharing what this partnership is going to be able to do. So yeah.
Yeah, it's awesome. It's exciting for us. I think there's an entire backstory behind how we actually ended up getting to this relationship that we should probably share with you.
Yeah.
But before we get into that, can you tell us a little bit about yourself, a little bit about your journey at KidSport, and exactly what it is that KidSport is trying to do in Calgary, in Alberta, and across the country?
For sure. Yeah. So, I started with KidSport back in 2019, actually right here in Calgary with the local chapter. So back then I was doing pretty much everything you can think of. I'm processing applications. I'm working on our marketing, third-party events. And then, when you're a nonprofit, you're kind of all over the place. So just wearing many hats, doing this and that, whatever really we needed to do to make sure we were funding kids and getting them out the door. And then about, 2022, I made the switch over to KidSport Alberta and I became the ED, executive director with them. So now I'm kind of, how we're set up, we're a national nonprofit, but then we have different provincial and territorial chapters that then funnel out into other local chapters. So in Alberta here, we've got 38 local chapters across Alberta, Calgary being one of them, of course. We've got Edmonton and smaller towns like Delia, Lacombe. So we're kind of all in these different nooks and crannies of the province to make sure that we can reach kids everywhere in Alberta. But basically our mission is to make sure that no kid is left on the sidelines and that every kid deserves the opportunity to play sport. And financial barriers are huge, I think, as we all know, to be able to play sport. So that's where we come in and we provide grants to those kids to make sure that they're able to afford their sport registration fees. And then we do our best also to connect them with different equipment partners so that they can get outfitted in the gear that they need as well. So a little bit of backstory on what KidSport is doing, but across the nation, I believe last year it was 40,000 kids were supported through KidSport.
Oh, wow.
17,000 of those were right here in Alberta.
Holy smokes.
And then Calgary was over 7,000. So huge impact right here in Calgary, but it's spreading across Canada, and nice to see that we have that spread too, but a lot more I think we can be doing across Canada. Even right here, the numbers are continuing to climb. I think it's not that entirely shocking given the economic state that we're in right now, just how expensive sports keep getting higher and higher all the time. And it's harder for everybody to pay just like for groceries these days. So that's why we're here, and just to make sure that every kid can play whatever sport it is that they want. So.
Yeah, maybe we should lean into that. I know Kai and I had a conversation prior, and we talk about sports a lot. Right now, our favorite sport, our team's not doing very well. But beyond that, why is it that sports are so important to children from your perspective?
Oh God, the list is endless for me personally.
Yeah.
Biggest one I think is just the life skills that you get from sport as a kid. So you kind of have that confidence building that you can take with you into the workplace. Teamwork is a huge one, of course. A really big one too that I think of is just having that community, and when you're younger too, being able to build friendships and those kinds of things. So the list for me goes on and on. I could talk about it all day if you really wanted to get into it, but for me it's mainly just those skills that you learn from sport that you can carry with you for the rest of your life.
Yeah.
Those are huge for me.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think just to add to it, have you guys, how about reframing losing and winning? Is that something that gets talked about a lot?
Yeah, I would say so. Yeah, because I think you learn a lot from losing. Honestly, I think you learn more from losing than you do from winning. So that is a huge thing too for kids. And that comes down to like the coaches that you have and the team that you have too. But really important thing for them to learn that even though you lose, that doesn't mean that that's the end all be all. You, especially like entrepreneurial wise, you lose every day a lot of the time. And then there's little wins along the way that kind of keep you going. And I think sport is a huge backer of that too. And you learn that at a young age. So I don't know, there's lots to be learned from sport. Like I can assume you guys played growing up, different sports. I would imagine it's safe to say that you wouldn't be sitting where you are right now if you didn't play sports.
Oh, 100%.
Yeah.
100%. The problem with Kai and I were probably too competitive.
Yeah.
I think in certain ways. But it's different. I think as you mature, you become competitive with yourself. Mm-hmm. That's how the natural evolution should work, right? Is that as a child, you get into sports to be able to learn how to manage yourself. Yeah. And then you start to compete against others to be able to express it, and then eventually you internalize it. So I think that's the level that we're at, is usually the best battles that I ever have been with myself, at least for the last 10 years. So yeah, for sure. Yeah.
I think actually a question on what you were saying with kind of like being involved with the children. So when you're actually doing the funding and things like that, is KidSport then going through the whole process with that kid to like get on a team and then also kind of make sure that everything jives with that as well? Or is it kind of like a handoff to the different associations or things like that?
So in order for our processing for the application, they need to be registered in their sport first. Okay. So they pick and choose whatever club that makes the most sense for them, location-wise, competitive level-wise, whatever that may be. And then they come to us, because we kind of have to do a little bit of a check, to make sure that you're financially eligible, but to make sure that the program is one that we can fund. And then just we send the money directly to the sport clubs. Just that way we know it's being used specifically for what it's intended to be used for. Not that we don't trust that. It also is just easier for us to send it to a much smaller number of sport clubs versus the 17,000 kids that we funded. So that's kind of how that all works. If there's sometimes there's stuff that will pop up and the family will reach out to us and we do our best to assist in whatever way that we can. But at the end of the day, the sport clubs that we work with, they're usually pretty good about anything that can pop up too. And we can always just have those conversations with them if they happen.
Is there any limitations to the type of sports? Like, is it pretty broad range, or is it, again, your kind of traditional soccer, hockey?
Honestly, in Alberta, it's pretty broad range. It's last year, it was over 65 different sports that we funded. Yes. That one is a new number that I've looked at. I was going to say it before I started working for KidSport. I didn't even know there were 65 different sports.
What was the weirdest one that came across, or the most unusual story?
Oh, gosh. There's some smaller ones, like archery is one that I never really think of. But then you think about like Olympics, you're like, oh, yeah, that makes sense, because then there's like biathlon that has shooting and like that kind of stuff. So, and then there's so many different kinds of martial arts too. So then that is like, it could be one thing, but we kind of separate it out. I'm trying to think of the other. Equestrian is one that like also makes sense, but we see it actually quite a bit. Maybe it makes sense with Alberta. We're a little bit Western here. So I'm trying to think of some of those other smaller ones, but they're not coming to me right now. Yeah. Archery is a different one though.
Yeah. That one's definitely not one you'd expect. I have some friends that do it, but yeah, it's definitely.
When you see it, you're like, oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
And then, like our top 5 funded sports are pretty expected, I would say. Like hockey, soccer, basketball, dance, and gymnastics. Yeah.
Just out of curiosity, which sport or which few sports are the most expensive ones to typically be involved in?
It can range, because sometimes it'll be just the registration fee is more expensive, and then there's other ones where the registration fee is lower, but to be involved in that sport is more expensive. Yeah. So like a good example actually is equestrian. Sometimes up front it's cheaper, but then once you're actually in it, there's all these extra fees of, well, the horse and the maintenance of the horse, and then travel for all your competitions and that kind of stuff. So a basic one people always go to is hockey is expensive, but honestly, from what I've seen, it's pretty on base with a lot of other sports too. Yeah,
that's a perception that I had as well too. I think well, to be fair, it's because my parents told me throughout my childhood that it's too expensive. Yeah. They're like, soccer works. You can just grab a ball of cardboard and wrap it in duct tape and you're good to go.
Yeah, so. and swimming is really expensive. I think really? Entry level, it can be cheaper because it's just like lessons at your local community center, YMCA. Those are usually pretty affordable, but once you get into competitive swimming, that one is like one of the top ones in Canada.
Coaches and tournaments and stuff, right?
And just training and all that. That one
And
does
the
get pretty
ratio.
pricey.
It's probably the ratio too, right? Because you don't have like 30 people to one coach with like or whatever it might be.
Yeah. So that one, I think there was just a report put out last week, and swimming was the number one across Canada for expensive. Yeah. Most expensive. And then ringette surprisingly was really up there. I thought it'd be on par with hockey, but hockey didn't even make one of the lists. Once, I think this is the one after like all the extra fees are included. Ringette was on that list in like number 2 or 3. And hockey wasn't even on that list, but it was for just registration fees. So there's that balance there, which is interesting.
That is interesting.
I grew up playing ringette and dance, which I always knew were really expensive, but now I'm like, oh man, how did my parents do that? Like those are 2 really expensive things to be involved in. And I was actually a bit surprised dance wasn't on the list for after registration, just with all your competition fees, those costumes. It's like a minimum $100 per costume, and usually in like 10 dances. So that one was pretty crazy to me. But yeah, it is a big range. But swimming, I remember, that one's really expensive.
Yes. Would not have expected that.
Yeah.
I'm swimming right now, and I don't have a coach, teach myself, but it's like I wouldn't have expected that one.
Well, because you think like equipment-wise, there's really not a ton, but once you get more competitive, it's very specific swimsuits that you need and that kind of stuff. So I think that's where it starts to get pricey. But entry, I think, is usually pretty reasonable. Same with soccer. When you're first doing it, there's those community-based grassroots programs that are a lot easier to start off with. And then I think it's just as every sport goes, as you get more competitive, the money just keeps starting to pile up.
Yeah, it makes sense. And ideally, I suppose looking at the bigger picture in regards to like the benefit of sports, are there any specific ones that you think, are a little bit better? We're talking about cost here, and obviously that can be a barrier to parents. But is it about the specific sport, or is it just about being involved in sports?
I think for me, it's more just about being involved in sports, because really it's whatever that kid has a passion for that I think is important, that they should be able to pursue that passion, whatever it is. And no matter what sport you're playing, there's different lessons to be learned. And I'm a huge advocate for multi-sport where possible. Yeah. Just, I think, not only for physical literacy, but also just you're meeting different kinds of people. There's different cultures and different kinds of sports and that kind of stuff. So wherever you can get your foot into the door with sport, I think is best. But like if you're playing tennis, a lot of the time it's more of an individual sport, which I think there's a lot to be learned from that. But I think there's also a lot to be learned from team sports. So I kind of flip back and forth, and for me, it's more just wherever that kid really wants to put their passions, and no matter where you are, there's tons to be learned. So
yeah, and I think in an ideal world, and this is one that I'm hoping to build for my children. So I have 3 kids, and I'm hoping to be able to bring this to life for them. But the formula that I've gone with, that I think is beneficial, that aligns with what you're saying in a lot of ways, is one individual sport, one team sport, one instrument, dance, and then something of their choice. Like that, it's 5 things. It seems like it's a lot, but there's 5-6 days in a week, right? Typically they don't do things on weekends too much yet. My kids are young, but I think that's what'll help them become a really well-rounded human being. And a lot of the stuff that we are looking at, ironically enough, so far hasn't been that expensive. But maybe we've just been lucky and we've stayed away from some of the expensive stuff. So, yeah.
I mean, I like the idea of that. And when I think back about my childhood, it sounds pretty similar to that. Like a lot more team sports for me, I would say. But then even with dance, like if you have to do a solo, then you're working on your own for that. And that one's all on you. So there's still within that some teamwork and personal work that you have to do. And then, instrument wise, I had to play piano for a long time. So yeah,
I was missing the instrument and the individual sport. I think I played the same instrument that every kid played. I played the recorder.
Oh yeah, school. True, yeah.
So that doesn't really count. Yeah. I think most kids are just either pretending to play or just like making the teacher get annoyed, right? Yeah. Just not listening. So that's always funny to be able to hear that. But back to the relationship now. So obviously we have KidSport on one side, we have Zeno on one side. What is it that excites you about the relationship? What is it that you're looking forward to when it comes to working with a company like Zeno?
Honestly, your guys' involvement so far has just been incredible, and the excitement that you're showing about working with KidSport too. It's honestly ideal when everybody involved is just excited about it. And I think that there's just so much room for growth too. Like, because we're mainly just starting off with the cleanup days. What do you call them again?
City cleanup,
City cleanup days. And then the donating and fundraising through the marathons, which I think is awesome because it's getting your guys' group involved and your whole network. And then it's all still funneling through to the chapters that for those people are local. And that's one of the best things too about KidSport is if you want your dollars to stay in small town Alberta, that's exactly where they're staying, if that's where you're fundraising. And so for this, we're doing it through the Calgary and the Edmonton Marathon, and that's where those dollars are going. So when you're fundraising for KidSport in your area, that you're helping kids in your area. And I think that that's something a lot of other nonprofits can't say. And so that's really exciting about it as well. But I think just the involvement and just the excitement around it for us has been huge. And it's coming at a time too where, like, just in general, I kind of been saying, like, families need us now more than ever. So having more involvement and excitement around it is really good for us. Like, for example, KidSport Calgary this year, they're already over 3,000 kids and $1.2 million out the door. Oh. It's only the end of April. Yeah. So they're flying through because, last year was just over 7,000 kids in the year. So these numbers are crazy, it's good, but it just shows you how much of a need there is. Yeah. And we're at a point where we never want to have to say no to a family. And so far we haven't had to do that. But thanks to people like you guys, we aren't currently having to say no. And that it's just going to keep growing as we continue to get partners like you guys. So,
yeah, if it's okay, I'm going to ask a little bit of a harder question.
Yeah.
What is it that separates Alberta from the rest of the country? Why is it that you guys have noticed greater success here than in other places? Is it you? Do we need more Kellys across the country? Or
I will definitely not put it all on myself. Yeah. No. Because Alberta, we've been a chapter here since 1995. So KidSport started in 93 in BC. And then we kind of were an early adopter, I would say. Yeah. But last year, like, there's a KidSport Quebec now, and they only just popped up last year. And they're supposed to start funding later this year. Yeah. But I think one of the things that sets us apart is just we're really entrepreneurial mindset-wise here. Not to say that in other parts of the country they're not, but I think we are hustlers in Alberta, and we're not tied to our provincial sport organization. So for other chapters like KidSport BC, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, they're all tied to their Sport BC, Sport Sask, Sport Manitoba. So they all work underneath that organization, and it's just they have a few staff people through like Sport Sask that work on KidSport, versus we don't have a provincial one like I think there was back in the day. But now that kind of just falls under the Ministry of Sport and Tourism. Mm-hmm. It's not an actual organ or governing body per se. So we have a bit more flexibility, and we have to fundraise. There's no dollars coming in from that organization to us every single year. Not to say that they don't have to fundraise, because I'm sure they have to spend a lot more than what they're getting through that. But we don't have that to lean on at all. So we are out there grinding every single day, making sure we can get those dollars in the door. And then I think because we're doing that, there's more awareness about KidSport in Alberta compared to other places. So they might have the same, if not more, need than us, but maybe not everybody knows that it exists. And then for those families that they can apply. So that's kind of where I see the difference.
Yeah, that's awesome. That makes a lot of sense, actually. And it does make sense. I think further to that, maybe we should give a little bit of the backstory in terms of how we got here.
Yeah, I'd love to hear it.
So it was interesting. I think you mentioned a couple different pieces in regards to how we're supporting the Edmonton and the Calgary Marathon. We also have an office location and operations facility in Lethbridge, and then now in Mississauga. So in the first year, and this is how we kind of do everything at Zeno, is that you don't do everything all at once. If you're somebody that can't do anything, you do everything. Mm-hmm. So it is kind of the mentality we have. So we'd rather not be that. We'd rather just focus in and make sure that we nail it out of the gate. But ultimately, we want to be able to do this at all our locations, and maybe we'll be able to amplify that KidSport story across our locations as we continue to grow as a company as well. But backtracking, it was actually, I believe it was Kai kind of had an idea a little while ago, and we were supporting St. Nate. How many years has it been now?
Three full, and then now we're just doing an extension of it. But 3 full years with St. and Nate.
Oh yeah.
So we did a full scholarship opportunity with them, which I think was super cool because, again, with the business that we're in, a lot of people come from St. Nate, and so we're like, you know what, let's do the Marathon Strivers for Sustainability. Let's raise money for that. And as we kind of went more in different areas of Alberta and then more into obviously Ontario, we decided, how do we actually make this a more provincial and then Canada-wide impact? And again, kid sport for us is a huge thing, right? It's something that we both believe in, and that we both can stand behind. I think it's something that we can make now that next step of that impact, because we kind of do it in stages, like Gursh was saying, is that it started fairly small, it got bigger, and it keeps getting bigger every year. And we really want to make sure that we can bring awareness to it as well. Like you're saying, growing up here in Alberta, I've known of kid sports since I was a kid. It's something that the branding is done really well. It's very integrated into sports. It's very easy to know that it's here, I find. So I think I do agree in other areas I haven't seen that as much, like especially in the Ontario market, I haven't heard of it as much. But yeah, so that was kind of the
when I think in Ontario, Jumpstart is so big there.
Yeah, actually,
so that's where people go first, and we try to work with Jumpstart as closely as we can, just knowing how expensive sports are. So if you're coming to us first and we can't cover that full registration fee, like let's say for our provincial chapter, we fund up to $350 per kid per year. Let's say that fee is $700. So they get the $350 from us, but then we typically will be like, if you need that rest covered, go to Jumpstart and apply for them. Or even if you're trying to do multi-sport, kind of try to do both, one for basketball, one for soccer, that kind of thing. So we do try to use both, but I think the Jumpstart has a huge name, especially, across Canada, just they have the power of Canadian Tire, Sport Check, all of that. You're getting asked at the till all the time. But I know for sure in Ontario it is massive. So I think that's where it's a little bit harder for KidSport out that direction to just make sure people know that there's both, right?
I think that's a cool thing about your guys' space too, is it's not really a competition, right? It's more like, how do you build each other up, right? It's the cool thing about non-for-profit side of things is that you can actually build the industry together and create more awareness. But yeah, so that's kind of the main backstory. I know that you guys do stuff with the Surge as well.
Yeah, so they do specifically with the Calgary chapter.
Yeah.
So I believe it's like every home game they've got the 50-50s going to KidSport Calgary. And they know they've been awesome to KidSport Calgary. I don't know them personally, but everything I've heard is just, and I see that you guys are supporters. I'm curious about that. But yeah, there's a super great tie in there. So that's awesome.
Yeah, and I think just to add to that as well in terms of like the non-for-profits working collaboratively together, the big piece behind us shifting away from Nate and Sate towards kids sport is to be able to increase the impact of what we're doing, but simultaneously allow individuals to have greater access to giving, because not everybody has gone to Sate and Nate, right?
Yeah.
But that we also made sure we left that relationship in a stable position as well too. So though I know this doesn't relate to exactly what you're doing, but it just goes to show the power of making sure that once you're a community partner, you're always a community partner. We're continuing our commitment to Sate and Nate, regardless of their attachment to our strides for sustainability or city cleanups initiatives. Though they're more than welcome to support them, we wanted to make sure that we are still, putting our foot forward and letting that, letting our broader community know that education is still extremely important to us, just as much as sports are. Though, sports in some ways it's a little bit more fun depending on your personality.
Yeah. Hey, and who knows, maybe some of those kids are going to Sate and Nate too, right?
Yeah.
It all kind of comes full circle.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, that's the goal. I guess since the time that you've been around, since 2019, like you had mentioned, has there been any super inspiring stories that have come across your table, or things that you've seen that have made a positive impact on the individuals that are receiving these grants?
Yes, it happens all the time. But one recent example, I've got a couple from the last year, especially with families coming in from the Ukraine. There's been a lot of really impactful stories there. But I recently heard of one actually just in Okotoks. So the daughter was on track to be an Olympic gymnast in Ukraine. And then, of course, they ended up in Okotoks. But we're having a hard time kind of finding a gym at first. Eventually somebody led them in the right direction, and immediately that sport club was just like, oh my gosh, the talent that this kid has is just insane. And lo and behold, they're training her in Okotoks. Mom ends up getting a job with that gym so that she can be able to support her daughter. They kind of, I think at first were giving her a deal to be able to use work or for the daughter to be able to participate, I should say. But kind of nice that is now building a whole community for that family. Giving mom an opportunity to have a job, the daughter a sense of normalcy after what she's coming from. So those ones I always think are super interesting. And then same idea in St. Albert. It was a family from Ukraine, and they wrote the most beautiful testimonial. I can't even explain it as good as them, but I was basically crying about it at our conference the other day. But essentially, the child was super big into soccer in the Ukraine, and they were forced to live in like the basement of an apartment in like non-human conditions for about 2 months. And then finally were able to escape and get to Canada, ended up in St. Albert, and they must have been talking to like a New Canadian Society or something like that, and they were led to KidSport. And thank goodness, because the soccer registration fee was probably $600, and that's
Oh wow, that seems high.
nothing that they can afford, especially with the situation that they're in right now.
Yeah.
So luckily they were able to apply and get funding, and now this kid is able to be on a team again, meet new friends, feel a sense of community, and just like, again, that sense of normalcy for those kids. The state that they were in before they were coming here is just what I can never even imagine. So we're able to provide those opportunities. And one thing I always think about too is just the sigh of relief we're providing to those families and those parents. It's not just the kids that we're helping, it's that whole family unit. And when they get the approval email, that's half of those testimonials is like, thank you for the sigh of relief that we just got, because we don't have to say no to putting our kid into their favorite sport. And like, these kids don't need to worry about these things. And that's what the parents are trying their best to not have to do, is like, let these kids know, like, oh no, you can't play because we can't afford it. It's no, you can play because we've got KidSport. And it's just kind of that mental health thing for the family and the kid, that they don't have to worry about this anymore. It's covered, and they can just participate as usual and learn all those life skills that we were talking about before. So
yeah, that's huge. That's huge. I think both Kai and I were born in other countries, and then we moved here when we were pretty much right at that age when you're supposed to be getting into sports. And I think the biggest thing that might be overlooked, and this is interesting that you brought up individuals that are from other countries, is that integrating into a new country, especially where the language and the culture and so on and so forth is not natural to you, is probably one of the hardest things to do. It would be beautiful if we lived, I think it sounds like with what KidSport's doing, and hopefully this is just the way the country ends up heading in general, is that certain things such as sports or the, like extracurriculars should just be accessible. There shouldn't be any cost associated with it. It should just be part of living in Canada, being Canadian, if we're talking about having a high level of integration successfully into our society, is that Canada is a country that really rallies together behind sport. I don't think there's any other time of the year or any moments that I see where people kind of put aside their differences and kind of come together when it's like sports or like musical artists or something like that, right? So no, that's cool to hear, and I think that's inspiring to us as well too, because I think for us it's really easy to forget what we're even doing the marathon for sometimes. Kai and I have had a lot of difficulties this year. I would say this has probably been our hardest year for training, in a lot of ways.
Yeah. I think you forget the other ones, but yeah. Probably, yeah.
Just try to block it out.
Yeah, year by year,
Yeah, this is our 6th year. So Kai's doing an Ironman this year, and I'm doing the Calgary Marathon in a few weeks here. And this has been, training-wise, maybe there was harder years, but the pain that's sitting in front of you is sometimes the worst. But just hearing what you're saying, even to me, and thank you for sharing it, kind of reminds me that, I'm not running for myself. Is that there's something else at play here that's way bigger than me hitting a goal or a target or trying to do something that's in play that allows me to be able to show up with less, I suppose, complaining.
Yes.
Right.
Yeah,
So
for sure.
So that's pretty sweet. And like, how does that impact you that's how it's impacting me, but how does that impact you as an individual, that this is your job? This is what you do on a regular basis. Like, how does that sit with you, knowing that this is the kind of impact that you're having on people's lives?
I mean, a lot of the time I think we get lost in the mix, and then one of those things does land on our desk with a testimonial, and you are immediately brought back to reality, and you're like, oh, I can't complain about my job at all. Like, there's no reason I should complain about my job. Every single day we're getting over like 100 kids into sport. It's mind-boggling. So yeah, you kind of just every now and then you need to take a step back, and I'm just really proud that and honestly lucky that this is what I get to do every single day. But yeah, sometimes it can get lost in the mix a little bit, just because you get into the nitty gritty of everything and you do lose focus. But we are lucky enough that every now and then we get a testimonial and snap right back into it. And you're like, oh yeah, this is exactly why we're doing it. This is why I'm having meetings all the time. This is why I'm stressed. It's for other people, and there's just a greater cause. It's bigger than myself. So it's pretty awesome to be a part of.
Yeah, that's cool. I think that's always where the most important things happen, is when you are reminded that this isn't about you. And that's when you know you're actually living a good life, right?
Yeah, for sure.
That's awesome. And I think going back into the KidSport side of things is how does KidSport entertain navigating some of those areas where people are marginalized or they might be in underserved communities and things of that nature. You guys mentioned that you have, how many chapters was it in Alberta?
38.
38. Obviously, we mentioned Calgary and Edmonton being the two big ones. But how is it that KidSport is able to identify these locations that have these needs that, or maybe even areas within chapters that need some more attention? Is that something that you guys pay attention to and you try to navigate?
Yeah, so I'd say we've been pretty lucky that we have our provincial fund. So with that one, it funds any kid who doesn't have a local chapter. So once we kind of start to see it pop up a little bit, you'll notice that there's like a nook of Alberta that there's a lot of applications coming in from. And so then from there, we can kind of target, maybe we should get a local chapter going there, just to be able to have that local awareness and involvement. But the nice thing is that no matter what, you can get funding, even if you don't have that local chapter. And then one other thing we've done in the past couple of years is we started up a partnership with the Indigenous Sport Council of Alberta. So we created within that provincial fund an application specifically for Indigenous children. So they can apply using that, and it's kind of just its own subset of that provincial fund where no matter where they live, they can apply, and it's just a little bit of a different application. We worked with the ISCA, Indigenous Sport Council of Alberta, to kind of narrow down what would be the best way to have the application set up for them, just to kind of limit any extra barriers there that were there with our current application.
That's awesome.
So that one has been really great, and we've seen good success with that. But then at the chapter level, a lot of it just comes down to partnerships with different community members. I know there's a really great one in Calgary. It's with Umoja Sports. And so the guy who runs that, his name is Jean-Claude, and he's one of the most incredible people I've ever come across in my life. He started this program. It's mainly soccer, but just the area of Calgary that he was in specifically, he noticed a huge need with these kids. And so he's the one driving them to and from practice. He's the one filling out their KidSport application for the parents. He was feeding them at one point too with like pre-made meals and like above and beyond what you can even ask for.
Yeah.
So then there's that partnership that we work with him to make sure those applications are getting done. And a lot of it is just finding the right people and setting up those partnerships to make sure we're not really missing anybody. But there's still a lot to be done because there's so much that we're missing, I'm sure. But at least we're on the right track, I think.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's Jean-Claude, guys. That's pretty inspiring.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Holy.
That's wow. So then I guess looking a bit further ahead, what are KidSport's goals for making further impacts in the communities, and how can individuals, groups get more involved?
Yeah, I mean, goal-wise is kind of like what I said before, is just never having to say no. And right now that means that our goal is just an increasing number of funds that we have to raise to be able to get every kid into the sport that they're wanting. So yeah, like I said, it was like 17,000 kids last year, and that was $5.9 million out the door. And with the numbers we're already seeing in Calgary, I can only imagine what that's going to be for this year. So yeah, the goal is always just to never have to say no. And I think a big one, just knowing kind of the government's plan for population, and with that being so many new Canadians in the future. I think it was like by I can't remember the year.
2025.
Yeah, that it was going to be like almost 100% was going to be based on new Canadians, was our population growth, which is...
Yeah.
I could have that number a little bit wrong, but I remember being blown away by that. So for us, it's how do we have those partnerships with different societies to make sure that when people are arriving to Canada, they know that they can access KidSport. I mean, for a lot of families, I'm sure sport might be the last thing on their mind. They're trying to get settled in a new country, but at least knowing that the option is there, or once they kind of do get settled, going back to that society to help kind of get that connection with KidSport. So in terms of how people can get involved, it's either donate, volunteer, just let people know about KidSport is huge, because you never know. It could be your neighbor. There's things that happen all the time. There's a lot of testimonials that come in where there's a family member that gets sick. So all of their funds and stuff are going to that. Or someone gets laid off, so they don't have the same income as they used to. And I remember when I was first doing applications, when I worked for KidSport Calgary, there was places I'm like, oh, that's a well-off community. Why do they need KidSport funding? But then you go through the store and you're like, oh yeah, it can be your neighbor. No matter where you are, they might be the ones that need KidSport. So spreading the word is huge.
Well, that's awesome. I think one thing to share about that too, I know you mentioned they might not be thinking about that when they're coming here. This is more on a personal story side of things, but I think that was like one of the major things when we moved here. So I was 6 or 5.5 when we moved from Germany, and I think the thing that integrated my parents into the community was my dad played soccer, and he actually met a lot of individuals. So that's obviously not a kid, but and then I integrated as well into that, and I think that was a thing for them. It was almost like it was that time when they could forget about other things, and I think it made life easier in those moments. So I think it is something where, yeah, I think sports, a lot of people don't realize what they actually do for the individual and for the family as a whole. And once you can integrate into that, you just feel more part of society at a certain point.
Yeah, it's not just the kids that are building the community, it's the parents too. Even if they're not playing the sport themselves, you end up having tournaments. So then, like, I know growing up, all the like parents on our ringette team were they had the best time together. And if you're new, it's a great way to meet people and just kind of have that immediate connection.
Yep.
Yeah.
100%.
Yeah. And maybe to add to like that as well too, one of the best stories that we have over the years in the company is in relation to what we were talking about, is like the priority of sports in people's lives. So in 2017 or 2018, going back even further to St. Nate, one of the first initiatives that we supported from a community level was an organization called Energy for All. And with Energy for All, one of the projects that we ended up doing was 100 microgrid projects, commissioning them in Nicaragua. And Kai had gone down there, and I think he saw something that was it was kind of surprising. When he told me the story, I was a little bit surprised, but it kind of adds to what you were saying in regards to like how important sports are.
Yeah, so we would go down there, and it was micro solar projects. So this isn't like something in your house here in Canada, but 1 or 2 panels, kind of battery. It's supposed to be meant for fridges, some sort of like cell phone device charging so that they could actually do educational things. And most of the people that we talk to would want to have it to watch sports, to have a TV to actually watch soccer. And the kids were super excited that was something they could have. So it was very different from what you think when you're sitting here and you're like, oh, we're doing all these great things to kind of give them a fridge so they can have their food. And they would rather go to the market on a daily basis and not have that fridge and actually have a TV where they could watch soccer. It was something that I was very, very like surprised by. It was super cool to see.
Yeah.
But I think it integrates into that, just how big the sports side of things. And again, you would see kids playing all sorts of sports and like have their own equipment that you never even thought you could make equipment out of that. And just, it was very, very cool to see.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah, it is surprising though.
Yeah, very.
It's what brings people together. So it totally makes sense.
Yeah. Yeah. And kind of touching on that, like, what is it that for you as an individual that, I guess at the point that you're at now, you're heavily involved in sports professionally. Mm-hmm. It's almost a default setting, right? With you being a kid sport. Do you maintain any sort of sports in your life, or is there anything that kind of pulls your attention?
Yeah, I mean, it looks different than it used to, of course. But I still do play ringette when I can. Just in like ladies leagues, or there was this like summer league in Calgary that it's like 3-on-3. So I've done that for a few summers, which is a little bit easier to navigate than during the regular season. And then sport just taught me how to live an active lifestyle and how important that is down the road. So going to the gym and doing all of that, it looks a lot different, but it's still a part of my life. And then now I just get to enjoy sport too. And whether that's going to watch like family play or going and watching the Flames, the Surge, anything like that, you get to appreciate it from a different perspective, which I think is nice. But yeah, it's a huge part of my life in like every way you look at it, whether it's personal, professional, what have you. So, and it's just always been a big thing in our family too, like watching it at home together. My dad was a gym teacher, so I think you can imagine, yeah, sport was not going to be an option of not being in my life.
Yeah.
So he's like the biggest sports geek ever, whatever, it's just always on the TV. So it has just always been a part of my life.
That's the thing with my dad. He wanted to, Kai came over to my parents' house one time, and he wanted to show Kai this thing. It was hilarious. In Edmonton, the Oilers have a Punjabi channel, and the broadcast is way more energetic than the thermal.
Yeah, I could see that.
So I kind of doesn't speak the language, but my dad's like, no, you're going to sit down and watch this, watch hockey in Punjabi, which is so funny. But that just goes to show like the country that we're living in and how much that diversity has a place naturally, and how much it's growing here. So, I mean, all in all, it sounds like, you guys are doing a lot of good work. From our perspective, we're super excited for this relationship. And for Zeno to be involved with an organization as reputable as KidSport and the work that you're doing is an honor. And furthermore, it's something that we are really excited about from a growth perspective. We know that one of the major alignment pieces is that your guys' growth is something that we can help support, but simultaneously take a benefit from. That there's going to be different challenges that you guys face and different challenges that we face, hence why we got so involved out of the gate. And I think maybe that's something that I would love to share with the people who are listening today, is that if you get involved in something, give it your all. Like if you're doing something just to be able to check a box, it's probably not worth doing. It's that anything in life that you're putting your time in is a reflection of how much you actually value your time. And if you do value your time, you're going to put your all in. And if you don't, then you're going to eventually end up wasting others. So I think for us, we're really happy about that. And one of the things I can say about other people or individuals or companies that are looking to get involved with KidSport is that we came in pretty hot and heavy.
I love it though.
Your team kind of met and exceeded expectations in many ways, including, I'm not sure if you heard about the landing page stuff.
Oh yeah.
Have you seen the landing page? No.
Not yet, but we were talking about it in our meeting this morning.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah, I'm really excited. I'm like, I wanted to have time to look at it before coming, but just got caught up in the meeting. But and I've heard that it looks really great.
It does. And that didn't take much effort. And I hate to say this, but there's been other, and this is more, not necessarily a not-for-profit, just in general. You get involved in partnerships and you show up with your all, and sometimes that other partner doesn't show up. And that's where it becomes difficult, because you either have to lean in heavier or lean off, but that hasn't been the case with this relationship. So I think for anybody who's willing to invest the time in KidSport, it's absolutely worth it. But if you want to be able to get something out of this relationship, it's going to be a direct reflection of how much you put into it. So that's pretty rare. Most relationships are not necessarily one-sided, but they're unbalanced. But this seems to be one that has a good balance. So maybe, as we can continue, that'll be something that'll increase. An increase in volume, an increase in impact that we make. So from my perspective, and obviously from Zeno, thank you. And obviously we're super excited to be part of this.
No, and the thanks goes right back, honestly. It's people like you that allow us to do what we're doing. So although I appreciate the sentiment, the thank you is all on you guys. And we're just as excited as you are to really get this thing going. And I just think there's so much opportunity here, especially moving it even bigger, across Canada with what you guys are doing with your offices too. Options are always endless, but I see a lot here and we're really excited about it.
Yeah. It's too bad people like Jean-Claude exist though. Because now I feel like a bag of poop.
No.
This guy seems like he's just out there, just saving the world by one person's effort alone, right? So it's cool to hear there's stories like that as well too. Is there anything that's worth adding? Anything that you want to do in terms of plugs or any initiatives that you guys have coming up that's worth sharing?
Honestly, no. We don't. KidSport Week is coming up at the end of May, so just an awareness piece. We'll have a lot going on social media. We'll share it obviously with you guys too. But yeah, it's the last week of May, so that one's coming up. Typically, it's just a big awareness piece that we do every year, just to kind of remind people what KidSport is, why it's important. So that would be the biggest one coming up. And then summers are always just full of a bunch of third-party events, golf tournaments and stuff like that. So it'll be a busy but exciting summer for sure. And just always processing applications, and we take them all year round. So it's not like we have any cutoffs. It's whenever the sports are happening, which is all the time. So we'll just be firing through all those applications and need everybody's help to make sure we can do it. Yeah.
That's awesome. That's awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us and sharing a little bit of your story and really, giving us some perspective on what KidSport is doing. It's been awesome. It's great getting to know what you're doing and what KidSport is doing, and we're looking forward to getting to know more over time. Yeah, for sure. Appreciate it, and thanks for having me. Of course. Awesome. I guess if you like watching the podcast, subscribe, and share with your friends. Thank you.